The snow fell slowly, as if the world had forgotten to move on that Christmas Eve. On a cold bench in the square, a well-dressed man trembled. But it wasn't just the cold that consumed him. It was the silence of a heart no one looked for anymore. "Are you cold?" asked a little girl with torn socks and eyes that seemed to see everything. He didn't answer right away, because that question pierced through something he had been hiding for years. And in that moment, everything began to change. If you've ever felt the cold of loneliness, this story is for you. Like, subscribe, share, and get your heart ready. Because sometimes, a miracle begins with a simple question. The lights of the city still sparkled like ornaments on a forgotten tree, but William Carter didn't notice them anymore. He had built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, sealed deals worth billions, and walked across red carpets lined with applause. But none of that clout warmed his bones tonight. On the eve of Christmas, he sat alone, buried in a wool coat that couldn't shield him from regret. He used to laugh at the idea of holidays, called them distractions. Every Christmas Eve, he'd stay late in his penthouse office, pretending the silence didn't ache. He turned down invitations, brushed off family calls, and told himself the grind mattered more. Now, 62, his phone was silent. The invitations stopped coming. And the only sound was the crunch of snow under strangers' boots as they walked past. He glanced at his reflection in the dark window of a closed cafe. His silver hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes were hollow, the kind of emptiness no money could mask. He hated how still he looked, like a portrait of power that no longer mattered to anyone. His son's photo was still in his wallet, though he hadn't seen him in over a decade. Tyler was only 6 when William missed his first Christmas. Then he missed the next, and eventually Tyler stopped waiting. William told himself it was for the boy's benefit, that success would provide what presents couldn't. But deep down, he knew he chose business over bedtime stories. This year, he couldn't stay in that giant apartment with its untouched dining table and perfectly decorated tree arranged by staff. He left it behind without telling anyone. No driver, no assistant, just him, hoping the cold might numb what he no longer knew how to feel. A gust of wind pushed snow into his lap. He didn't flinch. It was fitting. He'd spent a lifetime chasing warmth in all the wrong places, status, control, applause, and now here he was, surrounded by lights, yet drowning in darkness. People passed him like he was invisible. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe this was what happened when you traded birthdays for board meetings and goodbyes for quarterly gains. Maybe the world was finally giving back the silence he gave others. But just as he was about to get up and disappear back into the void, a small shadow approached. Tiny feet, light steps, and then a voice that broke through everything. "Are you cold?" The question was simple, but it landed like thunder. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her fingers exposed under 2 short sleeves. The coat swallowed her tiny frame. It looked like it once belonged to someone who used to protect her. Now, It dragged just above her muddy boots, clumsily tied with a piece of ribbon where buttons were missing. William blinked, unsure if she was real. She stood there, her eyes wide and unwavering, holding a pair of small wool gloves in her outstretched hands. "Here," she said softly, "yours look colder than mine." He stared at her, this girl offering something she clearly needed more than he did. "I'm fine," he lied, voice low. But she didn't move, didn't flinch. Just tilted her head and said, "You don't look fine." William hesitated, then almost without thinking he accepted the gloves. They were frayed, mismatched, and far too small, but they radiated something no gift had given him in years. Genuine care. For the first time in decades, he didn't know what to say. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Ellie," she said, sitting beside him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm waiting for my dad. He went to get something." "He said he'd be right back." William's chest tightened. There was no urgency in her tone, no fear, just blind hope, the kind only children carry like lanterns in the dark. He nodded, forcing a smile. "He'll come." Ellie pulled her sleeves over her hands and glanced up at the snowflakes swirling above. "I like watching them. They never stop dancing." Then she turned to him. "Why are you out here alone? Did your family go get something too?" The question sliced through him sharper than the wind ever could. He swallowed hard, unsure how to answer a child who still believed in waiting. "Something like that," he whispered. But Ellie didn't press. She just leaned her head gently against his arm, and for a moment, the cold didn't matter. The silence between them grew softer, like the snow blanketing the streets, muting the chaos of the world. William stared ahead, but his mind was falling backward into memories he'd locked away like dusty archives. The first to haunt him was the sound of a baby's cry, not from the cold, but from a crib in a penthouse nursery, waiting for a father who never came home before midnight, Tyler, his son. William remembered the Christmas when he was barely 4, dressed as a snowman for a school recital. William didn't show up. He had been in Tokyo, closing the biggest deal of his career. That night, his wife had sent a photo, Tyler alone in a paper costume, holding his performance sign with a crooked smile. William never opened the picture again. Beside him, Ellie hummed a Christmas tune softly, her breath forming tiny clouds in the air. She didn't know it, but every note pulled another thread loose in William's tightly wound heart. He thought of his ex-wife, who had stopped fighting to keep him present after too many empty chairs and half-promises. She didn't leave with anger, just fatigue. As Ellie swung her feet back and forth, William thought of all the stockings he never filled, the school plays he missed, the dinners he skipped. He had buried the guilt under contracts, awards and glass trophies. But sitting beside a child abandoned in spirit, if not in fact, all of it surged up like a wave ready to crash. "Do you think he forgot me?" Ellie asked suddenly, eyes still on the sky. William looked at her, stunned. "Who?" "My dad," she said. "Sometimes I think maybe I just imagined the part where he said he'd come back." His throat clenched. What was he supposed to say? That it happens? That sometimes people just leave? He couldn't. Because if he did, he'd have to admit that he was one of those people too. Instead, he cleared his throat and shifted on the bench. "I'm sure he meant it," he said. "People say things when they want to believe them." Ellie turned to him, brows furrowed. "But did your someone come back?" William blinked. He hadn't realized he was crying until he tasted salt on his lips. "No," he said quietly. "I never gave them the chance." A gust of wind pushed Ellie closer to him, and he instinctively pulled her in with his arm. Neither of them spoke after that, but the silence wasn't cold anymore. It was heavy, like truth settling in. The night deepened. Christmas lights flickered across the square, but their glow felt distant, like stars to someone lost at sea. Ellie had stopped swinging her legs. Her hands were tucked into her sleeves, her nose red, her shoulders trembling. William noticed her chin quiver, and something inside him snapped. Without a word, he removed his cashmere scarf and gently wrapped it around her neck. She looked up, surprised, her eyes reflecting the same wonder children reserve for magic. "It's warm," she whispered, touching it carefully. "You should stay here with me, just until your dad comes," he said, his voice uneven. Ellie smiled like he'd just offered her the safest place in the world. "Okay," she said simply. No questions, no fear, just trust. That one word filled William with something unfamiliar, not pride, not duty, something softer, something real. They sat like that, the unlikely pair, while city sounds faded into silence. William glanced at his phone. Still no messages, no missed calls, no one wondering where he was. For the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt honest. He reached into his coat pocket and found a peppermint candy. It was something he kept out of habit, a leftover from a company holiday basket. He offered it to Ellie. She lit up like 1,000 Christmas lights, unwrapping it slowly, as if it were treasure. "Thanks," she said with a sticky smile. William chuckled. "Haven't seen someone get that excited over a mint since ever." She giggled. "It's Christmas candy now." The wind howled through the buildings, but neither moved. They were wrapped in a fragile peace, and for William, it was the first time in years he didn't feel like running. But the church bell chimed midnight. Christmas had officially arrived, and with it came the realization that no one had come for Ellie. No one even looked. William glanced at her. She was still staring at the sky. Still waiting, and he felt the weight of a truth he could no longer ignore. Time didn't move the same way when you were waiting. That's what William realized as he sat beside Ellie, her small frame tucked beneath his coat, her head gently resting on his side. The city around them had quieted, as if even the streets understood that this moment wasn't meant to be rushed. Ellie began talking again, softly, with pauses between each sentence, like she was opening drawers in her heart. "I used to have a stuffed bunny," she said. "His name was Carrots. I left him at school one day and never saw him again." William nodded. "I used to lose things too," he said. Some I meant to lose, others I wish I hadn't. She tilted her head. Like what? He hesitated, then let out a breath. My son, Tyler. I didn't really lose him, not like a toy. I just wasn't there enough. And one day, he stopped calling. Ellie looked up at him, brows pinched in concern. Why didn't you go get him back? William swallowed hard. Because I thought I was too late, that I'd already missed my chance. Ellie didn't say anything. She just took his hand, the one not tucked in her gloves, and held it. Her fingers were still cold, but her touch was warm in a way that defied the weather. It said, I hear you. I see you. He studied her face, the freckle under her eye, the way her eyelashes curled slightly at the tips. She reminded him so much of Tyler. Before the resentment, before the distance, children weren't born with walls. Adults taught them how to build them. I like drawing Christmas trees, she said suddenly, but not the kind with gifts, just the ones with lights. I think lights are better than presents. William smiled. Why? Because lights stay on. Presents get opened and forgotten. He didn't know what to say to that. She was right. Lights stayed, even dim ones. Even the ones flickering over this quiet bench in the middle of a forgotten square. And in that fragile, wordless moment, William felt something thaw inside him. But still, Ellie hadn't once looked toward the street. Not once craned her neck for headlights or footsteps. Her eyes remained skyward, like she wasn't waiting for someone to arrive, but for something else to let go. The wind had softened, but the silence had grown heavier. Ellie's head rested quietly against William's arm, her breath steady, her fingers curled into his scarf. It was past midnight now, well into Christmas morning. Still, she hadn't moved. No restless glances, no questions, just waiting. Like hope was something she'd been taught to wear, even when it no longer fit. William's phone buzzed once, an automated greeting from the company's PR department. He turned it off. There was no one he wanted to hear from. No voice he craved more than the quiet one now leaning against him, reminding him of everything he'd once lost by choice. Ellie stirred slightly and looked up at the street lamp. Her lips parted, and in the softest voice, she asked, "They're not coming, are they?" The question shattered him, not because of what it meant, but because of how gently she said it, as if she'd been expecting the answer all along. William swallowed hard. I don't know, sweetheart." But the lie tasted bitter. He knew. They weren't coming. No one was. Ellie didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just looked down at her knees, brushing the snowflakes from her leggings. "It's okay," she said. "I'm used to waiting. Sometimes people get lost or busy. That's what the lady at the center says." His heart twisted. "The center?" She nodded. "The big house with the blue gate? They let me stay sometimes. But I like to come here on Christmas, in case he remembers." William turned away, eyes burning. What kind of world let a child wait in the cold for a father who never came back? And what kind of man was he if he sat beside her and did nothing? He thought of Tyler again. Wondered how many nights his son had waited by the window with a drawing in hand or a question on his lips. wondered how many of those moments he'd missed because he thought money could fill the cracks that absence leaves behind. "Ellie," he said slowly, what if I stayed with you until the sun comes up?" She looked at him, puzzled. "You'd really do that?" He nodded, voice trembling. "Yeah, I'd really do that." And in that tiny moment, beneath a broken street lamp, on a bench forgotten by the world, William Carter made the first promise he'd meant in years. William stared at the snow gathering on his shoes, his breath visible in the cold air. Ellie had drifted off again, her small body curled beside him like a question mark with no answer. But something in her voice, so calm in the face of abandonment, had struck a nerve he thought was long dead. He couldn't let the night end like this. Not again. Not this time. His hand trembled as it reached into his coat pocket. The phone was cold, but the numbers burned into his memory were still warm with old pain. He opened his contacts, thumb hovering over a name he hadn't dared press in years. Tyler, his son, the last person who had truly known him before he became a ghost in a glass office. He stared at the screen, heart pounding like it had something to lose. The weight of silence was suffocating. He had waited too long. Maybe the boy wouldn't answer. Maybe his number had changed. Maybe forgiveness was something William would never deserve. But then again, maybe not trying was worse. He pressed the call button. 1 ring, 2, 3, then a click. "Hello?" A voice answered, rough, uncertain, older than William remembered. His heart stopped. "Tyler," he whispered. Silence stretched. "Who is this?" "It's me," William said, his voice cracking. "It's your father." The pause on the other end was endless. William could hear his own breath, his pulse in his ears, the city beyond the call fading into nothing. Then Tyler spoke again, carefully, slowly. "Why now?" William looked down at Ellie, still sleeping under his coat. "Because I met someone tonight and who reminded me what it feels like to be forgotten. And I can't let that happen again." More silence, but not the kind that shuts doors. It was the kind that held them halfway open. Then, "Where are you?" William exhaled, eyes wet. "Somewhere cold, but not as cold as I've been." The sky had begun to shift, faint traces of dawn leaking through the edges of the night. William tucked the phone back into his pocket, his pulse still racing. He hadn't said everything he wanted to say, not even close. But the door had opened a crack, and that was more than he had dared hope for in years. He looked down at Ellie, still curled against him, the scarf loose around her neck. She had fallen into a deep sleep, cheeks flushed from the cold but peaceful. As he adjusted the coat around her shoulders, something caught his eye. A small white tag, fraying at the edge, stitched into the inside lining. Carefully, he turned the fabric and read the faded print. "Donated with love. Children's Outreach Center." His chest tightened. She hadn't been waiting for her father. Not really. She had been holding on to a hope she knew was already gone. And the coat, the oversized, tattered coat, hadn't come from someone who loved her. It had come from a donation bin. William stared at the label, the truth landing like a weight in his gut. Ellie was one of them, one of the children the world forgot while it celebrated itself. While he and people like him dined in candlelight, others like Ellie were outside, offering gloves too small to warm even themselves. He felt the sting of tears as he ran a hand through his silver hair. "Jesus, you weren't waiting for anyone, were you?" he whispered. Ellie stirred but didn't wake. She only tightened her grip on the scarf he'd given her, as if clinging to something, anything that felt real. William looked around. The street was still empty. No social worker, no relative, no one searching for her. And in that stillness, he realized something that terrified him. He didn't want to leave her here. Not now, not ever. He reached for his phone again, not to call Tyler this time, but to search. Children's Outreach Center. It wasn't far, just a few blocks away. Maybe they could tell him something. Maybe they could explain why this girl waited in the snow every year for someone who never came. But part of him already knew the answer. And another part was beginning to realize he could be the one who did come. The building was modest, aged brick walls, faded blue gates, and a wreath made of paper stars taped to the door. William stood there with Ellie in his arms, still bundled in the oversized coat. She hadn't woken during the short walk, only stirred once to murmur something about dreams and lights. He hesitated before ringing the bell. What was he even going to say? That a billionaire had found a girl on a bench and wanted to know why no one came for her. He was used to commanding boardrooms, not explaining fragile truths to strangers. The door opened, and a woman in a holiday sweater greeted him with practiced kindness. Her eyes moved from his expensive coat to the girl in his arms and softened. "Ellie?" she asked gently. William nodded. "I found her in the square. She said she was waiting for her father." The woman sighed, stepping aside. "She always says that." Inside, warmth filled the space. Handmade decorations, the smell of cinnamon, a tree surrounded by wrapped books and mittens. Children's laughter echoed from a hallway, but the sound only deepened the ache in William's chest. He followed her to a quiet office. Photos of children covered the walls, drawings taped beside each frame. She offered him tea, but he declined, too unsettled to accept anything. "She came to us 3 years ago," the woman explained, pulling up Ellie's file. "Dropped off with no details. No one's ever come asking, not once." William clenched his jaw. 3 years? She nodded. "She always hopes. Every holiday, she sits by the gate. She says, 'He promised.'" "We've never had the heart to stop her." He looked down at the paperwork, birth date, health notes, favorite food, macaroni with too much cheese. Under guardianship, none. Something inside him broke. "I don't know why I'm here," he said quietly. I couldn't leave her." The woman studied him. "Sometimes we don't choose these moments. They choose us." William didn't reply. He just looked at Ellie, asleep now in the office chair, one hand still holding the edge of his scarf. And for the first time in his life, William Carter felt something he hadn't felt since his son was small, cold, through the windows like melted gold. It touched everything, the bookshelves, the coffee table, the pine-scented tree, and finally settled on Ellie's face as she stirred under a warm, knitted blanket. Her eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the unfamiliar light. She sat up, confused at first. The last thing she remembered was falling asleep next to Mr. William on the bench. But now there was a fire crackling, a tree glowing, and the faint sound of music playing from an old radio. The air smelled like cinnamon and bread. "Where am I?" "In my house," William said softly from the kitchen doorway. He was holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate, complete with whipped cream and tiny marshmallows. "I didn't want you to wake up alone." Ellie looked around wide-eyed. "This is your house?" He nodded, walking over. "Now, it's ours, if you want it to be." Ellie took the mug slowly, her hands still small against the ceramic. "But why? Why would you take me with you?" William sat beside her, his eyes filled with something new, something unshakable. "Because I spent too long building things that didn't matter, and last night I realized I didn't want to spend one more day without someone who does." A knock at the door interrupted them. William stood and opened it. Tyler. He looked older than William remembered, taller, more guarded. But he was there. Ellie peeked from behind the couch. "Who's that?" William turned, a smile trembling on his lips. "That's my son." Tyler stepped inside slowly, his eyes taking in the decorations, the warmth, the girl. "You always did go big," he said with a half-smile, "even when you're trying to start small." William laughed, a real one this time. "I'm learning." They spent the morning together. Tyler and Ellie played cards on the floor, while William cooked breakfast, burning the toast, laughing when the eggs stuck. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real, and for the first time in a long, long time, William Carter wasn't alone on Christmas. The auditorium was full. Rows of students, professors and strangers sat silently as the lights dimmed and the final speaker stepped onto the stage. Ellie adjusted the microphone, her curls now longer, her voice steadier. She was 17 now, but her presence filled the room like someone who had lived 1,000 winters. She smiled, scanning the crowd. Her eyes landed on the 2 figures in the front row, William, with silver in his beard and softness in his eyes, and Tyler, arms crossed but heart wide open. Both looked at her the way someone watches the sunrise, grateful, humbled, changed. "I want to talk to you today about chosen families," Ellie began. "About how some people walk into your life when you least expect it, when you're cold, when you're tired, when you've almost given up." She paused, remembering the weight of that scarf, the frozen bench, the man with eyes full of silence. "On Christmas Eve, when I was just a little girl, I waited outside for someone who promised they'd come back. They didn't, but someone else did. A stranger, alone in his own way. He didn't save me from the snow. He saved me from believing I didn't matter. The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. That night, he gave me gloves, and I gave him mine. He gave me his coat, and I gave him a place to rest his heart. I thought I was helping someone cold, but I was helping someone lonely. And I didn't know it yet, but I was saving 2 people. She looked at William now, tears shining in both their eyes. That moment changed my life. It changed his too. Not with magic, with presence, with love. Applause broke out slowly, then louder, then rising into a standing ovation. But Ellie didn't move. She just smiled, one hand resting over her heart. Because the miracle hadn't been the home, or the gifts, or even the second chance. The miracle had been asking a question, and having someone brave enough to answer it. Sometimes, she finished, miracles don't fall from the sky. Sometimes they sit beside you on a bench and whisper, "Are you cold?" Have you ever helped someone like this? Or been helped when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. And if this one touched your heart, like and share it with someone special. See you in the next video.